Today's episode is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you. It can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more podcast platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started right now. Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. On this week's episode, I'll be speaking with former federal prisoner Tony Viola. Tony has a pretty interesting story. He was a businessman, a business owner, who owned his own real estate company. At the age of 23, he started his own company, but he didn't incorporate it until he was 26 years old. Up until his business was raided by the FBI, law enforcement, and other agencies, Tony had over 100 employees and closed around 3,000 deals annually. After almost 20 years of running a successful business, Tony's world came to a screeching halt when his building was swarmed by FBI agents, the SWAT team, and local law enforcement. The story goes that Tony Viola masterminded the nation's largest mortgage fraud in U.S. history to date. Before doing this interview with Tony, I didn't know much about the case. Everything Tony told me on and off the record was a bit mind-blowing to me, even more so after I went through the evidence locker on his website, which everything backed up what he was saying. Tony was convicted in federal court on 35 counts of wire fraud, 18 U.S.C. 1343, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, 18 U.S.C. 371. He was later acquitted on state charges of telecommunications fraud and concerning the same transactions. Judge Daniel Gall, who presided over the second trial, has stated in writing that Tony Viola is innocent and prosecutors committed misconduct, and that document is in the evidence locker on Tony's website, which is www.freetonyviola.com. I speak to Tony about his life growing up, how he started his business, the moment the feds, SWAT team, and local law enforcement swarmed his place of business, the moment he was found guilty in court, his nonstop fighting within the courts, and what life was like in a federal penitentiary, and the moment he was released from prison. Here's my interview with Tony Viola. So Tony, what was your childhood like growing up?
I was very lucky. I had 2 wonderful parents. I had a younger brother. I went to Catholic grade school. I was very fortunate to go to college in Washington, D.C., Georgetown University. I would say I had a very wonderful childhood with a big, loving Italian family. Lots of relatives and cousins and lots of family events. So very, very good childhood.
Did you ever suffer any type of abuse or trauma growing up as a child?
No, I never did.
What were your early years in life like growing up?
I mean, I would say school has got its moments for all kids, where kids could be mean to each other, but I was pretty typical. I was sort of a nerd. I studied a lot. My first job was packing bags at a grocery store. I worked at a Wendy's drive-through. I had a lot of friends. I was sort of the guy you'd study with because I was kind of a nerd or a bookworm, whatever you want to say. I was not good at sports. I did play sports, but I was usually the worst person on our teams or the last person to be picked, but I did it anyway. And I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, always wanted to come back here. So even though I went to college in Washington, I always wanted to come back to Cleveland, which I did.
So how old were you when you first started working in the real estate industry?
Well, my high school sweetheart was a photographer, and she used to love taking pictures of old houses. So my first job was working for a big company in the finance department. And Trina kept saying, Tony, look at all these cool houses in Cleveland. They're so cheap. We should be able to buy them and fix them. And so I guess it's good to be 21 years old because we just said, okay, sure, let's just start a real estate company, even though we really had no money. And we bought an old house and we somehow fixed it up. We really didn't know what we were doing. And we're ripping out kitchens and bathrooms and stuff. The properties in Cleveland were very inexpensive. And there's a lot of big old houses with fancy fireplaces and crown moldings. And the first house we bought for a couple $1,000s. And we fixed it and sold it. So we made a little money and we said, okay, well, maybe we can be in the real estate industry. Let's go. And we built our company from there.
That was the company that you had up until when you got busted or when they raided your company, I should say?
Right. I mean, what happened to us was we started buying and selling houses like you see on TV, the fix and flip. But we really didn't have any money. And so by doing that, we actually met investors and people in the business. And they actually wanted to hire us to sell their stuff. They said, hey, if you guys can find a good deal, maybe you could just give it to us, or maybe we'll hire you to sell it. So basically, one day we decided to go buy some shirts and ties, and we took real estate classes, and we became licensed real estate agents. So we started a real estate brokerage, originally in a very small building in the city of Cleveland. And then we later, by the mid 1990s, moved downtown to downtown Cleveland into an office building downtown.
How many employees did you have when your business started to grow?
Well, we would add salespeople one at a time. I mean, it was literally 4 or 5 of us in the beginning in this tiny office with one coffee pot and like 5 pens. And over time, we grew our company by doing a good job for clients. And we leased some space in downtown Cleveland. And the building owner owed us a commission. And they actually said, well, maybe you guys could just move into the building and help us manage it. And so instead of paying us a commission, we got a rent credit. And then we went in and fixed up some of the space in our building. Once we moved our company to downtown Cleveland, it was a lot easier for us to add salespeople because we had a nicer office and we could attract better salespeople. So once we were in downtown Cleveland, and the name of our company was Realty Corporation of America, we really did start growing our business very, very nicely.
And at what point in time into your company was it investigated? How long had you been the business owner at that point in time?
Well, probably close to 20 years. I mean, at least more than 15 years. I mean, I didn't know we were being investigated. Basically, our company was raided one day, and I was completely shocked. The FBI broke down the door. Our door is always opened because we want people to come into our office. They jimmied the door closed, broke it down on television. There's media everywhere. There's police, FBI agents with guns looking for mortgage files. There was a SWAT team. There was actually pontoon boats in the Cuyahoga River. I mean, this was broadcast as breaking news, and officers were in our office looking for mortgage files. They said it was the nation's largest mortgage fraud case. And we were not a mortgage company. We never did mortgage loans. And so I was almost like a Three Stooges episode, except these people had guns where they're running around. Where are the mortgage files? We don't have mortgage files. Anyways, I was indicted in both state and federal court. And according to the government, I stole $46 million and orchestrated a scheme to trick banks into making no money down loans that later went into default.
How many people were arrested, including yourself, and how many were indicted, and actually how many were convicted?
Well, our company had over 100 employees, and I think about 6 of our employees were indicted. I was indicted, arrested. This task force, this mortgage fraud task force, which was funded by the federal government and had the U.S. attorney here in Cleveland, as well as the state prosecutor's office and the Ohio Attorney General. Altogether, they indicted over 1,000 people. And most people ended up pleading guilty. But this was a big thing. This was the government telling the public, hey, remember, this is during the mortgage meltdown, the bank bailouts, and the economy is really bad. Hey, if your house went down in value, it's this Tony guy. We rounding up these crooks. And what they were saying in their charging documents was that our company tricked banks into making no money down loans. So in the case against us, me, supposedly, I tricked JP Morgan and all these big banks into making no money down loans. That's what I was accused of. And that's what these mortgage fraud task force cases were. All of us, whether you're realtors or sellers or buyers, we all supposedly duped banks into making no money down loans to people who really weren't qualified to buy real estate. In the state charges, I was charged as a mobster, like a RICO, like a racketeering, like my company is a criminal enterprise. Every time we sell real estate and get a check and deposit it and pay one of our employees, that's money laundering. And the company is a criminal enterprise because we devised a scheme to trick banks. The banks don't ordinarily make these loans, according to the government. So if you got a house, no money down, it's because there's a scam. And I devised the scam. So the government was saying that I devised a scheme to trick the bank into making these no money down loans. And that's what I was charged with. And that I stole $46 million. That because I was devising the scam, I made all this money. I made millions of dollars because I was tricking banks into making these loans and it was all fraud. And so I got all this money. That's what, or my conspirators, me and these people that I set this scam up with got $46 million. That's what they said in their press release.
Did the banks have to sign off on every single deal?
Yes. Well, this is why I proved that I was innocent at the second trial. The theory is just wrong. It's like saying we tricked McDonald's into selling a quarter pounder. It turns out that the banks were offering these loans, were promoting these loans, and in the indictment, that on every single one of the properties that I supposedly tricked them into making these loans, they signed off and said, sure, the people could buy the properties, no money down. So in my case, is a paperwork case. It's a document case. So the key is documents. And we were able to find the documents that proved that there was no scam. But the government didn't produce those before the first trial. So I lost and I was convicted. At the second trial, a whistleblower inside the prosecutor's office gave us these documents. By the way, these documents not only prove that I'm innocent, but probably everybody that was charged by this task force, because the theory was just incorrect. If the bank was not tricked and knew it, there's no scam, there's no fraud. And so that was our argument, that it was like selling, we tricked Starbucks into selling coffee. The banks promoted it, knew it, signed off, no scam.
Yeah, I was on your website and I saw the evidence locker. There was so much evidence and documents and even statements by the Justice Department and FBI, which, isn't that what led to your release?
Yeah, what happened was this. There was a federal prosecution, a state prosecution, and a task force. And for 10 years, the federal government said that they didn't have to produce evidence that was at the task force. And they claimed that they didn't put any evidence there. But it turned out that they were lying. We ended up getting documents that they shifted evidence from the U.S. attorney in Cleveland, a prosecutor named Mark Bennett, and the FBI agent, Jeff Kassouf, actually packed up 19 boxes of evidence and sent it to the task force. And once we got that document, the courts ruled that the government couldn't send evidence somewhere else and claim they didn't have it. And then once the task force became basically the responsibility of the federal government, then the FBI started getting nervous. They admitted lying about evidence, and so did the Justice Department. So the U.S. attorney's offices and the FBI both admitted lying about evidence. Remember, we had evidence at the second trial that was federal evidence that they claimed they didn't have. So a judge finally looked at this and said, well, how could this guy in jail have evidence that the government says doesn't exist? That's FBI records and federal records. So that's what unraveled the case.
Backing up a little bit, you have 2 trials.
Right. I wouldn't plead guilty. I went on TV and said, I don't have $46 million. I don't own mortgage companies. The government didn't even know what businesses I owned. A government witness told them that Tony was at a company where there was a scam going on, but I'm not the Tony that she was talking about. So there's more than one Tony. So the government didn't even know what businesses I actually owned. And so I just refused to plead guilty. And people told me, they said, Tony, you can't win. And it's true. Court's not fair and you can't win. But I said, I'm not pleading guilty. I don't own mortgage companies. I didn't trick banks. So that to hammer me, I was indicted in federal court and state court on the same charges. And then before the federal trial, I was indicted a third time in state court again. So there was 3 indictments and 2 trials.
Were you offered a plea deal at any point in time? Less time or probation or...
Yeah, I told the lawyers to just knock it off with the plea. I wasn't going to do it. I just refused. I said I'm innocent. These banks were promoting these loans. We didn't trick any banks. They're blaming me for mortgage problems. I don't do mortgages. I didn't steal any money. I started the business in the basement of my house. All of our employees knew this was nonsense. They offered to testify. And I just refused. I said, look, I'm not pleading guilty. And there was tremendous pressure to plead guilty. The lawyers did not want to fight. I mean, I had one of the worst lawyers ever, a guy named Jay Milano. He didn't want to go through boxes of mortgage files and figure out what was going on. And so basically the lawyers were like, just plead guilty. Now, before the second trial, a whistleblower came forward inside the prosecutor's office and gave me the evidence that they were hiding. And she said, Dawn Pasella is her name, she said, you can't win with a lawyer, that the lawyers will not fight the government. They won't stand up and tell the jurors this case is a bunch of rubbish, that their theory is wrong. They're just not going to do it. And so even though she had proof that I was innocent, she felt I would lose in court if I used an attorney. And so she helped me prepare. So the second trial that I won, I did it without a lawyer from jail for 2 months.
So you're sentenced to 12 years in prison. What were they originally offering you? What was your offer that you rejected?
Well, the federal prosecutor claimed that I could have gone for 8 or 9 years. But I wasn't going to plead guilty. And I'm not saying I'm right, but I told them that I'm not going for an hour willingly. You know, they might destroy my business and ruin my company and destroy my life, but I'm not going to make this easy. The government made a mistake. They didn't know what companies I owned. And, you know, once they go on TV and say something, I mean, you can forget it. I mean, these prosecutors will not admit they are wrong. And when that piece of paper says United States of America versus Tony Viola, that's what that means. They are going to hammer you with the power of the country is going to come down on you hard. And if you say you're innocent, that they were upset. They got mad. They were like appalled that somebody would say that they were wrong. And, you know, the judges a lot of times think, well, you must be guilty because the prosecutor says so.
When you were sentenced to 12 years in a federal pen, do you remember the feeling you had when the judge handed down that sentence?
It was awful. I just felt my life going before my eyes. It was 12 and a half years. I was ordered to pay millions of dollars in restitution to these banks. Now, in the background, the prosecutors were high-fiving each other. I mean, they couldn't have been happier. It was like the Cleveland Browns won the Super Bowl. I mean, Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres and Steve Dettelbach, all these prosecutors are jumping up and down and whooping it up. And the marshals are coming over and hauling me to jail. You know, I didn't get to self-report or show up at this jail at a certain time. They just hauled me right in jail. It was awful. Now, I did tell the judge I was innocent at sentencing, which probably got me a lot more time. But I just said, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I did not trick banks. I understand the jury verdict just came back, but I'm innocent. And he said, okay, good. Well, you have a second trial, so you can prove it. And then I did. I did prove it. But the answer is it was awful. And then to be hauled away and then shipped around to all kinds of jails, awful experience. I would never wish it on anybody.
Were you at maximum security prisons? I know that it was a white-collar crime, so...
Right, but I was not eligible to go to lower security jails initially because of the length of my sentence. Some of the lower security jails don't have much fencing and you could leave. So the theory is if you have a long sentence, you're a flight risk. So no, they shipped me to high security or higher security jails. I was bounced around in what's called jail transit on planes and vans. I mean, the government can't waste enough money shipping prisoners around on people that killed people, people that had killed people with an axe, people that child molested. I mean, it was. Yeah,
I know awful. The federal prisons carry like terrorists and mobsters, gangsters, fraudsters, and all those high-profile government prisoners.
Right, but in my case, I was fighting the government. So if you help the government, if you're an informant, then they send you to a prison camp. And it's kind of more mellow. But when you fight, they ship you around. So I think I was been to 15 jails because they would just say, Tony Viola of the office, pack up your stuff. You're going. Where am I going, sir? You'll find out when you get there. And then they would ship me all over the place with a spit bag over my head, handcuffed, leg chains, waist chains, put on buses and vans and planes and put in a lot of jail transit centers where you're stuck for a month or two, especially after the second trial that I won. They really tried to keep me away from, you know, like yourself, the media, people looking into these type of cases or have interest in this. They absolutely did everything they could to disrupt my legal work.
Did you ever do any time in solitary after or before the court dates?
Yes. Awful, awful experience. Once I started winning my case, reporters start, because there was filings on PACER, which is the federal court system. So some of the reporters were following my case because, remember, it's the nation's largest mortgage fraud case, right? So they said, you're too high profile of a prisoner, so for your own benefit, we're going to stick you in solitary confinement. And it's awful. I mean, you hear men literally losing their minds that have been in solitary for a long time. I was in for about 2.5 months. They threw away all my legal work. I'd always have to have copies, and my friends would help me. But you're literally locked in a cell, a 6x8 cell with a toilet, and they slip the meals under the jail's door. You're supposed to get an hour of rec a day. Most of the times they don't. Officers would say, "What are you going to do about it?" So the solitary confinement is very punitive, and it's awful.
What was an average day like for you in the feds?
Well, it depended. If the jail wasn't locked down, I would get up as early as I could, and I would go to the jail law library. I would sit there. I would look up court cases. I would work with my investigator. I would gather records and evidence, and I would file things in court. And I just said, I'm not going to stop fighting. There's nothing else to do here anyway. And then other guys would come and either help me or I would help them. A lot of men had been in jail for a long time working in the law library. So they were a wealth of knowledge. Some of the best ideas in my case came from other prisoners, not lawyers, other prisoners. I started working and trying to help the guys too. So we really put a little crew together. That was the best days when I could work on my court case and get things done. Sometimes we'd be locked in. There'd be a fight. They'd lock us in. So we're stuck in our cells. Or they'd find contraband. They'd find drugs or cell phones, lock us in. So, I read a lot. Usually I had a radio to listen to so I could listen to music or sports. If I was allowed to work out or walk around the track, I would. But it's just an awful experience. It's a toxic place to be. It's awful, jail. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, even for the officers working there. It destroys their soul being in that environment, and I hated it every day.
And how were you treated by not only officers but other inmates in there, being a white collar criminal and not being some rapist or murderer just in there for petty crimes other prisoners would call them?
Well, I was lucky because the guys liked me. No one bothered me ever. Guys that were sex offenders, child molesters, they had a very hard time. They would get the blank beaten out of them. But me, I used to teach classes. I taught a real estate class. So a lot of the guys, they looked at me and said, well, the guy's a nerd, but maybe we can learn something from him. I used to help. I was very humble, happy to help anybody type letters or look up stuff for them on court cases. I worked in reentry for a very nice lady at the jail, meaning we'd help guys if they had child support issues or traffic tickets, who try to help resolve those for them. So the guys were very nice to me. I never had any problems with the inmates at all. And because I was fighting, that's another thing. The guys that are snitches or informants, depends on where you're at, but that could make a very difficult time in jail. But because I was fighting, most of the guys thought it was cool. Hey, we hope you win. And I'm sitting in the law library all day. So I never had an issue with any other inmate. Thank God.
So you never got in a fight or caught up in any of the drama, prison politics, gangs, or anything of the sort?
I mean, a couple of motorcycle dudes came up to me once and they were like, yo, Tony, there's not that many white dudes here. So when there's a fight, you're rolling with us. And I was like, listen, I don't fight anybody. I like everybody. I'm a sales guy. And the dude was like, man, listen, if you ain't rolling with us, we're going to kick the blank out of you right now. And I said, okay, I get it. I'll roll with you. But I mean, I said I would roll with them, but thank God I never got into any fights. I stayed away from the jail politics. There was a lot of jail politics, especially at the higher security jails where you can sit and who you can talk to and who you could work out with. And I tried to just stay out of it. I didn't want to upset anybody. I didn't want to make anyone's time worse. And I never borrowed any money. I never owed anybody any money. That was a big problem. Guys would gamble and run up gambling debts in jail, and they'd have to have their family bail them out and send some dude's girlfriend money. There's a lot of problems in these jails. And so I try to stay away from all of it. I'm Catholic. I used to go to church. My faith helped me. If you're in jail, I think having faith helps get you through. And just try to be reasonable to everybody and respectful. Guys in jail are going through the worst times of their lives, right? So a little respect goes a long way, because you don't know what someone else has actually gone through, how hard it is on them. I would hear guys on the phone trying to tell their kids, Daddy will be home in 3 Christmases. Guys were having hard times. A lot of marriages disintegrated. The girls left. And so it's really a place to be humble and respectful, because there are guys with hair trigger tempers, and there are guys going through a lot there. So I tried my best not to upset anybody.
You got out sooner than expected. I believe you did, 10 years of the 12-and-a-half-year prison sentence?
Yeah, almost. I was in jail for about almost 9 years. I have a couple years to go. If I didn't win the second trial, I would probably had 15 more years. So I'm fortunate to be out. I still am on house arrest because my conviction has not been vacated yet, although we think that's coming next. But I'm very grateful to be out.
So let's talk about everything that went down before you got out of court and everything that is continuing to go down. So like we talked about before, the Justice Department and the FBI wrote statements, but basically summarizing, what did they say that landed you out of prison after the second trial?
Well, what they have been saying for years is that I received all the evidence that I was entitled to before the first trial. And they did sworn statements. And more recently, they admitted that their statements were false, that they told the judge that all those rulings you made against Tony were based on our false statements. So they asked the judge to vacate all of the rulings in their favor about evidence, the Justice Department and the FBI. Now, the FBI is claiming, and these documents are on our website, so anyone can go to freetonyviola.com, like you mentioned, the evidence locker. I just figured no one would believe a prisoner. So we started uploading the documents, right? And so you could decide for yourself. The FBI is claiming that they didn't know about their own records, okay, in the FBI record system until the U.S. attorney first said they lied about records and then found FBI records in the U.S. attorney's office and then said, whoa, these are FBI records. We're going to send them to the FBI. And the FBI was like, yo, we didn't know anything about it. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. If you assume that there's not a cover-up, okay, and then it's incompetence on the most massive scale, and literally the FBI should be shut down until they can track records. Because the records, in my case, they go on, do a computer search. So if an FBI agent is investigating you or me or anybody, they go to I mean, this is ridiculous that they can't find their own records. So why on earth these judges put up with this rubbish, I have no idea. The whole case should have been thrown out after the second trial, really. But certainly now, the fact that we have to continue to litigate this case when they said that they weren't even aware of their own records, that is absolutely ridiculous. And it's scary because that means the public really cannot have confidence of, are these people in jail really guilty? Or is the FBI playing games? And so to me, it's absolutely outrageous. Not just, oh, poor Tony. I mean, look, they did to me what they already did. This affects a lot of people. There's a lot of wrongful convictions and injustice in our country. And for the FBI to claim that they don't know about their own records in their own record system, forget about the task force where they sent stuff to. They're saying that they didn't know about their own records. That was ridiculous. And so, yes, I was released from jail because there's fundamental questions about whether or not they hid evidence before the first trial. Also, quick point, it doesn't matter, supposedly in our country, why the evidence was hidden. It doesn't matter if it's a mistake or it's a cover-up or somebody didn't mean to do it. If somebody is innocent, the case should be dismissed. And so we want to make clear that we're not arguing necessarily of this or that. We're just saying this evidence proves innocence, not just of me, but a lot of these people prosecuted by this task force. And so it's the materiality of the evidence, not the good faith or we made an honest mistake. It doesn't mean that an innocent person should stay in jail if there's a mistake. You can tell because we've gotten a lot of the emails between the prosecutors and stuff. You can tell that these people never thought any of this would see the light of day, that these prosecutors feel invincible, that they can do whatever they want. Because who's going to do anything? Who polices the police? Who prosecutes the prosecutors? So they're making these ridiculous racist emails. One of my witnesses happened to be of Jewish heritage. They're making fun of her. I mean, it's just absolutely outrageous. And again, we are trying to make history in our case. We are trying to get the prosecutors indicted. Mark Bennett, the federal prosecutor, and Dan Caceres, the state prosecutor, these guys have left a trail of absolute misconduct in writing. Don't take my word for it, in writing. And what's gone on is absolutely mind-boggling. And it does show, by the way, if you fight, you just got to keep digging and doing records requests. And our website got a lot of leads. I have an investigator. If you never give up and you just keep digging, you will be amazed at what you can get over time.
Are you getting anywhere right now in regards to clearing your name or anybody else's names that went down with you with this whole quote-unquote mortgage fraud scandal?
Well, we have right now in Cleveland federal court a motion in front of a federal judge to find that there's misconduct in my case and require all of these Justice Department lawyers that have filed pleadings in my case to say that I should stay in jail, for all of these people to be forced to report misconduct. That could undo my case. We have a court filing in Columbus, Ohio, with the Ohio Court of Claims to get more of the romantic emails between the prosecutor, Dan Caceres, and the government witness, Catherine Clover. The prosecutor had an affair with the lead witness in my case. Okay? This is ridiculous. And everybody knows it. And nobody does the right thing ever. But we found they were doing private emails on Yahoo accounts, these romantic, salacious emails. So we're waiting a court order that those have to be produced. That could create an automatic vacating of my case. And we also are waiting still now for the FBI to produce more of these records that they claim they just found. They're saying that they just found 10,000 new documents and pages of records. So we're now waiting for them to produce those records. At some point, we're going to file a motion to throw the whole case out. But right now, we've got these sort of initial court filings going now to see what happens. But yes, we're going to try to vacate the entire case. And I'm trying to go in with all of the co-defendants together to vacate the case. So we've been in touch with the other attorneys for people that I don't care if they helped the government or not. I don't care if they were informants or not. I believe everybody's innocent of this nonsense with these banks. And so the government lets banks do whatever they want and then prosecutes realtors to say we tricked the banks. It's ridiculous. So we want to go into court united, everybody, to say let's throw the whole case out and let the judge all of the lawyers at once. Yeah, I mean, they ruined everything I worked for. They ruined our company. Our employees, some bounced back pretty quickly. They got other jobs. Others didn't. Others had personal traumas and serious reversals, challenges with addictions. It's heartbreaking. I mean, but again, this has to stop in our country. This win at all costs, where the prosecutor won't admit that they're wrong, and they start with a conclusion and work backwards. This is not acceptable in our country. We need a fair criminal justice system that actually does not over prosecute and over police and over indict and hammer people who won't plead guilty. And when prosecutors break the law, they need to be disbarred and imprisoned. I mean, right now, there's no accountability at all. And prosecutors who follow the rules and turn over evidence don't win as many cases as the crooked prosecutors. And nobody in the government has an incentive to do the right thing. You know, when they were prosecuting me, they had all these press conferences and YouTube videos and CNN breaking news and the local paper just hammering me. Now, when we're fighting, everybody's just a hardworking bureaucrat. Oh, well, Tony, sorry, we lost a few pieces of paper. We got a lot of cases. We need extra 60 days. I was in jail. They used to say, oh, Your Honor, could we get 60 days? It's the holidays. Well, I'm in jail for Thanksgiving and I'm in jail for Christmas. So this whole bureaucratic apparatus is there to enable government misconduct. And, in my case, there's a tragedy. And I think you know about it. I mean, with Dawn Pasella, I mean, the prosecutors got upset that I wouldn't plead guilty. And they started doing illegal things to find out what our trial strategy was. They did all these illegal voice recordings. And Dawn is the lady who ended up giving me the evidence that they were hiding. She worked for the prosecutor's office, and she was ordered to record me after I was indicted to figure out what our trial strategy was. And this is terrible. And then she's found dead in her apartment the day she's supposed to testify, and it doesn't trigger an investigation or a hearing. Now, her family is helping me, but this is outrageous that the prosecutors were caught doing something completely inappropriate. They crushed this young lady's spirits. I mean, it's awful.
What was her cause of death?
Supposedly, she had excess alcohol consumption. She was found dead in her apartment by her father shortly after she was scheduled to testify at my second trial about government misconduct. Now, she did struggle with addictions, and maybe she did. I mean, maybe that did happen. But the circumstances surrounding her death and the fact that Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres wired up their secretary, their office manager, basically, and said, here, go hang out with this guy and find out pretend you're going to help him with his trial preparation. It's completely inappropriate. I can't bug the prosecutor's office before, to hear what they're talking about. But they basically did this to figure out our trial strategy because they realized that I didn't own these companies, these mortgage companies, and I didn't get $46 million. And they were worried they might not win the case. So we have win at all costs prosecution here in our country, and it creates misconduct, an incentive to commit misconduct. And then the state and federal and task force nonsense where they're shifting evidence between locations and jurisdictions, and then they can plead ignorance. Oh, I don't know. The state must have it. Oh, the feds have it. No, it's over at the task force. Well, I didn't work at the task force. And so the government was caught red-handed. The U.S. attorney here in Cleveland, a guy named Justin Herdman, I mean, this guy was caught red-handed overseeing absolute misconduct by his employees. And yet nobody stands up and says this should be investigated. They all cover for each other.
Before we conclude this interview, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about?
Well, I hope that what happened to me somehow turns into good. I hope that this unfairness and illegal action by the prosecutors contributes to a conversation in our country about how to stop mass incarceration, because we've got serious problems in our country. We have a lot of innocent people in jail. We are putting people in jail with addictions. I was in jail with people who are autistic. I don't even know if they knew what they were doing was supposedly wrong. And we have to somehow work together to stop this evil. So, our website, freetonyviola.com, it's got a blog. I'm grateful for you giving me the chance to talk about our case. If people have suggestions, have ideas, want to share information, I would really appreciate it and welcome it to have an ongoing conversation with people. But in my case, there's two problems. There's a lot of government misconduct, and there's courts that haven't done anything about it. And when an injustice is clear, and when there's a second trial establishing innocence, someone should not stay in jail for years after. So we need to have our justice system start to do the right thing, not cover for their buddies. That's the problem. So any ideas to help, I'm in. I'd really be grateful.
That was my interview with Tony Viola. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe to my Patreon, go check it out, www.patreon.com/unforbiddentruth. You have access to additional podcasts. I have a virtual true crime gallery you can subscribe to, and there's much more. Thank you for listening. I'll see you on the next episode. Unforbidden.